Welcome, my name's Emily Mello, and I'm Deputy Director for Education and Public Programs here at PAMM, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's talk and the opening of Iman Issa's Heritage Studies, organized by Associate Curator Diana Nowie. Heritage Studies reimagines historical objects and explores shifting interactions between artworks, language, history, and display. We're very pleased to launch this chapter. That's my word, not Iman's, but this part of the Heritage Studies series, this new series that also was launched this year at the Sharjah Biennial, where more of this work is on view. Issa will speak about her reasons for undertaking these formal reinterpretations and the manner through which the generation of forms can affect and utilize the past and its materials. The talk will delve into some of her previous projects and will include video and audio screenings. Iman was born in Cairo and is an artist based in New York. She studied philosophy, political science, and visual arts at the American University in Cairo and visual arts at Columbia University, where she received her MFA. Her recent group and solo exhibitions include the 12th Sharjah Biennial, the 8th Berlin Biennial, Muka in Antwerp, the Tensta Kunsthal in Stockholm, the New Museum in New York, the KW Institute of Contemporary Art, Berlin, the Sculpture Center in New York, and the Contemporary Image Collective in Cairo. Her books include 33 stories about reasonable characters in familiar places, which I've been enjoying reading, published by the Sculpture Center in 2011, and Common Elements by the Glasgow Sculpture Center in 2015. Issa has received both the HNF Makba Award and the Abraj Group Art Prize in 2013. She teaches at Cooper Union School of Art in New York. I'd like to thank Sylvia Cuvali of Rodeo Gallery, where Iman currently has work in the series Lexicon on view in London, and Carol and Oscar Cycles for their support of the exhibition. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, it's stunning. The objects are beautiful. They're both have this sense of being both enigmatic and precise, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy that mix. And we're really pleased to have Iman here to be able to speak about her work. And I'd like you to help me join me in welcoming Iman to the stage.
So thank you, Emily, for this introduction. I also would like to thank you all for coming and to thank Diana Nowie for her really wonderful collaboration throughout the past year in helping put this exhibition together, and her support and hospitality, but also other members of the museum's curatorial and administrative staff, Jay Orr and his amazing installation team, Tobias Ostrander, thank you for your feedback and hospitality, and many other individuals whose names I unfortunately do not know. So thank you. So just to give you a sense of what I'm going to do today, I thought instead of speaking about the series on view, what I'll do is actually go back a little bit in time and look at previous works and try to jot out a relationship of how the series came into being, and to think of like some of the questions and concerns which have kind of run into thread into the work. So the way I'm going to speak about it is mainly looking at how one work leads into another work. And for the most part, I'm going to do it in chronological order. So I'll start with older work, going into newer work. It's not really the only way to speak about the work, but it's a way that I find kind of constructive. So please do bear that in mind. The other thing is I'm going to be speaking about the work mainly in terms of intentionality. So thinking a lot about what, why I did certain things and what decisions have kind of resulted in which forms. So I'll start actually with a work that goes back to 2006, which is quite an old, it's quite an old work. I think now that I look back, I think probably the oldest work that I still look to and think about dates back to 2001. So that kind of gives you a sense of where that is. But basically what happened is I moved from Cairo to New York in 2005, and I was working a lot with the city and thinking a lot about this question of how does one communicate a personal relationship to familiar figures events, places. And you can kind of imagine, this seemed to me like not a self-evident question to answer. Like, it didn't seem like it had a very easy answer to give. And when you move from your home city into a different city, you can kind of imagine that this question became a lot bigger in my mind. So I became a bit more obsessed with it, and whatever kind of relationships I had, they started to become even more complicated. So in 2005, I was in New York, and I think I was doing what most people do. You walk around the city, you kind of familiarize yourself with these new spaces, you kind of establish relationships to people, to spaces, to streets and signs and all kinds of urban spaces. And usually what I do is I photograph spaces. So whenever I walk around, I take a lot of pictures. So I was doing this in New York, and something kind of strange, a bit strange started to happen, is I started to feel I was coming across all of these places that I've never been to before, but they seemed familiar. They struck me as familiar. So you'd be like walking down, and all of a sudden, the sun would hit a building a certain way, and all of a sudden I would feel like this building looked familiar. Or I'd be, sitting with a fountain in front of me and a modernist backdrop, and the scene would look familiar. But never people. So it was kind of a very strange thing. And I started to feel like I should document these moments. And they all seemed to be moments that were happening in time. So I was using a video camera at that time. And I did this. So I documented all of these moments where I encountered spaces that I identified as familiar. And I edited them together into a single video, which I called Skyline. And these are, I'm not going to play you the video, but these are stills to give you a sense of it. And something kind of really peculiar happened with that work is that as I finished the work and I kind of put it together, I kind of imagined, because all of the spaces that I did document did correspond to what I identified as something familiar, then the whole video I thought would kind of act as a testament to a particular location. But looking back at it, actually the video looked extremely generic. These images looked as if they came from like something like a website like Getty Images, so like the most kind of generic images of an urban space that you can think of. And this was a bit strange for me, because there I was, going around photographing these spaces that I thought I had a personal relationship to, and ending up with spaces that looked like an advertisement. I wasn't really, sure what this means, but I started to think that perhaps what I was actually recognizing in these spaces was not the presence of a familiar element, but rather the absence of a distinguishing detail. That it was actually the very emptiness of these spaces that allowed me to photograph them in the first place. It's kind of a strange assumption to make, and I'm not really sure exactly what it means, but I decided to go with it and to kind of treat or think of these spaces that I was encountering as if they lacked something. And so the next project I did, I thought, okay, if these spaces lack something, then I should try to introduce an element that would bring them into a moment of definition, or at least raise the question of what does it mean to bring into a space into a moment of definition, or an image of a space. So the next project I did is called Making Places, and this is exactly the kind of premise with which I operated in it. And the way it consists actually of two elements. One is a series of photographs, and another is a set of videos. And even though they're I consider them different projects, I titled them with the same name because they came somehow from the same set of concerns. So these are the images of Making Places, and most of them have kind of a common thing where they have a figure doing something in a space. And I titled each image with whatever object the figure was using. So this one was titled Ball. This is Vase, Flashlight, Megaphone, Balloon, Laser Pointer, Flashlight plus smoking can, Hula Hoop, Bucket, Mirror. Yeah, so you can it kind of gives you a sense of these images. And it was really interesting for me doing this project because, like I said, the reasons I had kind of undertook for making this series of prints was to bring these spaces into a moment, or to kind of identify what was specific and particular about them. But of course, when I showed this series and people wrote about it and I spoke to other people about it, and it was always described as, documentation of actions in urban space, or, the figure in urban space, and for me it was a bit strange for many reasons. Part of the reasons is because sometimes I look at these photographs, I feel like time doesn't even exist in them, like they're not a document of a decisive moment in the way we think of a photograph in general. And I think it becomes particularly evident in an image like this, where it's clear this never happened. It's only the interaction of the camera with the with the light, with the figure. So in many ways, I think even though I didn't alter these images or play with them in Photoshop or whatever, I sometimes feel as if I montaged the figure into the space. The other reason I find it kind of strange to speak about them as documentations of actions is because the process I followed. In that, for example, to come up with these spaces, I would be walking around the city. I kind of learned to see as my camera sees. So I see everything as a frame. I would snap a picture, go back to my studio, kind of plan exactly what sort of action I was going to introduce. I go back to the space. It would have to be the exact same time of day, the exact same light, the exact same frame. If I accidentally widened my lens, if a person passed by, if the light changed, if anything changed, I was no longer interested in documenting these spaces, which made me feel that perhaps what I was interested in had very little to do with these spaces I was photographing, but also that it had that it was a very fragile thing. But having said that, I also do recognize, looking at these images, that they didn't necessarily succeed in capturing what I thought was specific or particular about these places, which made me think that perhaps I need to do something else. Perhaps I should delve deeper. Perhaps I should go, to really think about what made these spaces interesting for me. And one way I thought of was perhaps I should try to access my own memories and personal associations and use these as materials in order to bring out what I thought was specific and particular about these spaces. So this is what I did in the next project, which was in 2009, titled Triptychs. I started, so I had these collections of spaces, photographs of spaces, and I started looking at these photographs and thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to construct a setting based on the memories and associations that these spaces evoked. And so I started to do this. So I would look at a space, and then I would construct a setting in my studio based on the memories and associations that this image evoked, and produce a photograph out of it. And so I'll run you through some of them. So this is a second space I identified as familiar, and based on it, I constructed a setting. And this is the third one. And of course, memory can take many forms. It could be a smell, it could be a face of a person. But for me, I really wanted to work with settings, and I wanted to produce these, to come up with these objects that corresponded to what I thought evoked these memories. And it's kind of a funny operation because the way I was going about it is I was trying to be extremely precise. And what I mean by this is I would, for example, see an image of a typewriter in my mind, but it would be a specific model of a typewriter. So I would go down the streets, I would look for that particular typewriter, and I wouldn't stop until I found it. And sometimes it would take several months until I found the right one. But as soon as I'd find it, I'd recognize it immediately, but I'd also know where to place it in the setting. And it was the same for a pen, a pencil, a vase. So in many ways, it felt like it was very easy to construct these settings. But at the same time, having said that, I have to say, I was doing this, but I was also looking at these final photographs I was producing and feeling a bit like I wasn't really sure if they actually were able to successfully evoke these memories. So in many ways, I started to have doubt about whether these photographs actually corresponded to these memories. And it was a very strange thing, because there I was, going about this extremely rigorous process, trying to find the exact elements, trying to place them exactly where they should belong in the scene, and ending up with photographs that I wasn't really sure what they corresponded to. I continued with what I did anyway, but then I decided that maybe I should do something else with these photographs. And so what I did is I started to look at these photographs I produced based on memories as if they were found or produced by someone else, and use them as a point of departure for a third artwork, which became part of the whole series. So for example, this is a photograph of the setting I produced based on memories and personal associations, and then I looked at this and tried to forget about my own memories, forget about my own reasons for making it, and try to come up with a concept that was external to it, so to judge it as if it's a found image, and from that I would construct a work. So for example, for this one, I made a sculpture, which was a wooden sculpture with a red thread, and I think the concepts I came up with were like military procession or victory. And this is the way I displayed the series. So the first image with which I started, which is of this space, I found was displayed directly on the wall as a small image, and next to it was framed the photograph of the setting I produced based on memories, and next to them was the third element, which was based on kind of looking at these photographs in a removed way. So, and I have to say, I know my process is very elaborate and it can get very confusing, so if you feel like you're unable to follow, please let me know. But I'm just running you through the series to give you a sense, because the third element kind of changes form from one series to the next. So for some of them, it was a sculpture. For other ones, it was a video. For others, it's a sound. This one, for example, was a metronome, which was going every minute, and then this light was flashing every 4 minutes, and they're going in and out of sync with each other. And I think for this, the concept I came up with from the image was bureaucracy gone mad. Yeah, something like that. So this leads me to the next project. I mean, I'm skipping a lot of work in the middle, but I'm just trying to jot out what I think are kind of interesting themes for what has led to this work. So as I did this work, which was based on memory, I was always kind of a bit wary of what does it mean when you're trying to communicate with someone else, which is what all of these works were. What does it mean to use memory as a form of communication? Because memory is something which is extremely subjective. In many ways, it's not very accessible, and you can't really question it. I can tell you, this reminds me of this, and then what are you going to say? You can say, no, it doesn't remind you of this. And in a way, I was kind of uncomfortable with this, because I wanted to produce forms that would produce more of a dialogue or be more in conversation with the viewer. So I started to think, what are instances where you have this dynamic, where you have both a subjective vision, but then one which tries to, or asks to be held accountable. And I started to think of monuments and memorials. And I became interested in monuments and memorials because most of monuments and memorials are done or are usually undertaken by one person or a group of people who take it upon themselves to produce forms, but at the same time, these forms kind of claim to be speaking to a collective. So I became kind of interested in this and thought that perhaps looking at monuments and memorials would be a way to try to identify, this kind of relationship between memory, but also something which is more more communicative on a larger level. And I started looking at monuments and memorials that I knew a lot about the subject matter that they commemorated, so I knew a lot about the figures, the history, the events, and I came up with two conclusions. Is that I thought, for the first time, this was around 2010, that actually the language of monuments and memorials, which I tend to think of as highly symbolic language, but also one with a lot of abstracting tendencies. And it was a language that I used to be very dismissive of. Like, I didn't really think it worked. I started to think that actually perhaps there was something very constructive about this language, and that it would be able to communicate something that would be hard to do otherwise. At the same time, I felt that in the case of the actual monuments and memorials I was looking at, I didn't feel that necessarily the forms I was encountering actually succeeded in communicating something I identified as familiar about the figures, events, or places that were being commemorated. So what I decided to do is I decided to take it upon myself to offer alternative forms to these monuments and memorials. And I did this. I presented them as proposals, mostly in the form of displays in art spaces that are presented as, attempting to offer an alternative form to an existing monument or memorial. So I'll run you through some of them. This one, the title of this one is Material for a Sculpture Proposed as an Alternative to a Monument That Has Become an Embarrassment to Its People. And it's these two lights. One of them kind of lights as the other dims, and they alternate slowly. And then I should really say that these titles, the title that I just mentioned, was a way for me to also recall the original monuments, because it was clear that to say the name of the figure or the date of the event on which the monument was based was perhaps the least adequate way to recall this figure or that event. So my titles were my kind of way of doing that. This one is Material for a Sculpture Recalling the Destruction of a Prominent Public Monument in the Name of National Resistance. And you can see that in all of them, the symbolic element is taken quite seriously. So you have the diagonal, you don't know if something is going up or going down. You have the tassel, which was based on a real statue that was destroyed. And I always imagined that the only thing that remained from the statue was the tassel from the head. This is Material for a Sculpture Acting as a Testament to both a nation's pioneering development and continuing decline. And there are these two speakers set on the wall. And again, you have the diagonal. You don't know if something is going up or going down. They were playing two sounds that alternate, but at the same time, I thought one sound represented development, one sound represented decline. But actually, when you start working on it, you don't know what development sounds like or what decline sounds like. And you start to think that development sounds like decline and decline sounds like development. This one is Material for a Sculpture Commemorating the Victory of what initially appeared to be an inferior army. And it's this, again, the symbolic quality or the symbolic element is taken quite seriously. It's these structures with these legs which are based on like what you would see in a military museum holding a missile, and you have the mirror. And on the mirror, there's a red thread stretched, and across the wall, there is a black thread held with pins. Red is the color of victory, but it's also the color of death. Black is the color of death. The whole thing ended up being the colors of the Egyptian flag, but I only realized that retroactively. This is Material for a Sculpture Commemorating a Blind Man who became a great writer, opening up an unparalleled world of possibilities to the people of his nation. And it's this monitor which is playing a video of a black screen that turns into white with these flashing colors in between. This is Material for a Sculpture Commemorating a singer whose singing became a source of unity of disparate and often opposing forces. And it's the sculpture and then an image next to it. Material for a Sculpture Commemorating an economist whose name now marks the streets and squares he once frequented. And it's this vitrine with all of these objects. And of course, the objects are made up, like I came up with them. But I kind of, as I was doing it, I imagined that some were for his, personal life, some were for his work, some were gifts, and I kind of color-coded them accordingly. This is material for a sculpture representing a bygone era of luxury and decadence. And this is material for a sculpture commemorating the life of a soldier who died defending his nation against intruding enemies. And it's these 4 sculptures and this book, blank book with color inserts. And the way I thought of it is it was kind of based on an imagined diary of a soldier. So I came up with some statements like, we spent the day in the field, or it was a day of endless bombing, or many soldiers died in the field. And then based on each statement, I came up with a color and a sculpture. This is material for a sculpture representing a monument erected in the spirit of defiance of a larger power. And it's this kind of obelisk-like shape placed on a pedestal. So yeah, the series is 10, and I kind of ran you through them, and I'm sorry to have to tell you all the titles, but I thought it was kind of important to give you a sense of the process, but also how important the language was in these displays. This kind of brings me back to an older work, which was done in 2007. And it's a work, when I was doing it, I actually didn't realize how important it was until much later. But I think in many ways it was one of these works which led to a lot of the concerns that came back much later. It was actually based on a commission by the ICA in London. The curator, Mark Sladen, who was the curator there at the time, had devised this show that he called Memorial to the Iraq War. And he invited a group of artists to try and think of if they were to make a memorial to the Iraq War at that time, which was in 2007, what would it look like? And it was kind of a strange thing because it was definitely work I wouldn't have undertaken on my own, but I was really happy to be asked and to think about it. And what I did for it was this video, which I'll play for you, and then I'll kind of talk about it more.
Yes, this looks like a regular house. Like what I picture an average house to look like. A cube in the middle of a desert. The kind of place that can hold any number of people at any moment. No, I don't find this powerful. I never found explosions powerful. It's because they leave too many traces of themselves, too much evidence they existed. They kill memory. And there's nothing more powerful than memory. I don't find them monumental. They can speak about power, but only superficially, inasmuch as something bigger might seem stronger. I don't find them painful either. They really have no effect on me. They're like the images they put on calendars or wallpaper, images you can use to speak about pretty much anything. No, I don't find them seductive. And it's not because I think of what's hidden. I have no awareness of consequences. I'm like a child when it comes to images. My earliest memory of Baghdad comes from a film, The Thief of Baghdad, the clip where the king flies his horse over the cityscape. How else to remember a city you've never been to? But yes, I do know that that was Basra. I've always found it strange how I have no other images of Baghdad after that. Only of the war. But I did always imagine it to be a beautiful city. No, not magical, but somehow beautiful. I picture the war there to be like any other war. I can see images of guns, explosions, planes, tanks, Hummers, lights, sirens, ground soldiers, car skeletons, bombed structures, checkpoints, barbed wire, signs reading danger everywhere. But there is one image that stuck in my mind. An image of a boy pissing on a soldier's helmet. Of all the war images I've seen, I feel like this is the only one I'll remember. It's as if the balance can shift in the strangest places. As if fighting can be the ultimate action. But it's only the gesture that truly holds the power.
Yeah, so this work, which was done in 2007, was a very strange work for me, and the reason for that is, I was kind of someone who had actually followed the Iraq War kind of closely. I knew a lot about it. I was like, reading the news, but also I felt kind of implicated in it. And there I was asked to think about how to kind of conceive for a memorial for it. And I came up with this. And basically what was most disturbing about this is I felt like I really was not able to identify what was specific about the war, like how this war was different than any other war. And part of me felt like, you can say maybe all wars are the same, or all statues of great men are the same. But then I would say, but no, in my mind, it's different. And this idea of in my mind became, kind of important for me, because I thought that perhaps my mind was the place where I would actually be able to find this difference, to find the specificity. And this is why memory became kind of important, because I felt it was the place that I would perhaps be able to locate the specificity that was missing. But again, you're confronted with the same problem, which I still haven't completely figured out how to deal with. But around 2013, I became really interested in the form of autobiographies. Not my autobiography, but other people's autobiographies, because I thought that in many cases you had this thing where you had, in autobiographies, you had an instance where someone was telling their personal story, but with the implication that it actually corresponds to something larger. So it's the story of this man or this woman, but it's actually, no, it's the story of this region, of this war, of being subjected to a much more collective experience like displacement, or being subjected to sexism or racism, and that in autobiographies you would have this combination. At the same time, you would have the humility of speaking only for yourself, because I think there is also something very problematic when you don't do that. So you can think of this project, which I'm going to show you, as kind of coming from both a belief in this subjective place, but also a kind of not really feeling that it corresponds to something larger, and trying to find the points where this actually happens. So what I did for this project is I spent a couple of years reading all kinds of autobiographies, but all different sorts of figures, but mostly figures who were, you could describe them as somewhat of activists, or people who've spent a lot of time rallying for causes which are much larger than themselves. And in the end, I decided to work with 5 books. And these books were the autobiography of the political activist and theoretician Edward Said, the feminist, political, and social activist Nawal al-Saadawi, the cultural historian Taha Hussein, and a Palestinian writer called Mourid Barghouti. And basically, I went through the books line by line, sentence by sentence, word by word, and I tried to look for these instances where I believed that the personal narrative turned into something more. So all these statements where I felt this kind of happened through the actual constellation of words that the writer used. And then I collected these. I had probably like around 200 pages of text. And from these, I started to construct these text panels. This is an image of the installation. So I don't know how well you can see, but there are these like tiny or small white frames were juxtaposed with these images and sculptures. The white frames are all text panels, which are excerpts from these autobiographies. I'll just kind of run you through a few to give you a sense. So this one is from a triptych of the text. So it says, "They're killing horses, isn't that right? I'm a writer, which means I don't do anything, isn't that miserable? But they're killing horses, isn't that right?" So this is a triptych. "I used to go from library to library looking for books I couldn't find, but now they were all at the tips of my fingers." And this is a diptych. It says, "Are you a Russian doctor?" "No, I'm an Arab doctor." Books were arranged behind glass windows. There were hundreds of volumes, hundreds of titles, hundreds of authors, amongst which I read the name of our great author. I would stamp on the ground and shriek, "I will never marry, never, never, never." The fortune teller was a blind woman, but she could read the future. It was a blue sky. They call it Carolina blue. Houses on the mountains, houses on my mind, houses I entered in my childhood, houses whose locations I do not recall. The first pioneers of women's education graduated from here. Do you know how they determine the distance of stars from Earth? Oh, it's easily done. You take a fixed point on Earth, deduce the angle, then calculate the distance, the philosopher replied. He believed in this. Moreover, he believed that thinkers, scientists, and writers were not going to join political camps. It took him only a few months in the country to realize that he was mistaken, and that thinkers, scientists, and writers were all joining political camps. It is light, but actually due to the extreme fog in the valley, it is dark. Was it not poverty that deprived people of their dignity? Maybe harm can be beneficial. I have studied as you study, worked as you work, and I wish that your luck will be better than mine, although I would neither trust luck nor run after it, he said to me. My mother, and before her my grandmother, my father, my uncle's wife, my grandfather would call it the bridge, simply the bridge. What does a magician do? Doesn't he give himself the ability to foresee the future? So these are some of the excerpts. I just wanted to run you through a few of them to give you a sense of what they were like. There are 54 that are part of the work. And the way I kind of arranged them is they really became one work, so you wouldn't know which excerpt came from which book. This is kind of the last thing that will lead me into this project that I'm working on here. But it was basically in this project that I decided to become, or that I started to become really interested in museum objects and displays that belong to the past. Because what happened with this project is because I was trying to collect these excerpts from the autobiographies and thinking that these were sentences, statements that corresponded to things I recognized as familiar, I thought I needed to do an extra step to communicate that to someone else by providing images to these excerpts. I spent about 1.5 years trying to come up with images, and I couldn't. So I did all sorts of things. I would take the books, like kind of look at descriptions of places, construct settings, photograph them. I would go through my photo archive, hundreds of photographs, looking for something that worked. Nothing worked. At the same time, I was doing what I always do of visiting museums, so museums of modern and contemporary art, but all kinds of museums, so museums of antiquity, geology, religion, science, police, press, photography, portraiture. And it was there, like while visiting these museums, I started to run into these elements and displays that all of a sudden struck me as actually perfect for illustrating what I believed was familiar in these autobiographies, and the kind of spell broke, and something really magical happened where I started to construct all these images based on displays I found in museums. So I started to do that. These are some of these images of the photographs I constructed. And it's a bit funny because even though I kind of say they are based on museum displays, they don't really look anything like the museum displays. So they're kind of based on a memory of a feeling of these museum displays, which is kind of a strange way to say, but I'll just go through some of them. And what was also interesting to me while doing these is that, when you look at an object or when you look at an image, you can try to think of exactly how does it communicate, because all of these elements were, for me, a way to communicate. So it was really important to try to understand how they do that. It was clear to me that these images spoke, and they said something that I identified as important, but I wasn't really sure how they communicated, because one way you can enter someone's house, you can see a 1970s pendulum clock, and you can think, oh, okay, this is familiar, this reminds me of my childhood, it looks exactly like a clock I had in my house. Or you can think, no, this is familiar because it reminds me of the function of seeing time, so you see the object in terms of its function. Or you cannot even see the function and just see a form, and the form would communicate on different levels. And in many ways, I didn't really understand if these objects communicated because they kind of implied a time period, a geographical location, or was it, the colors, or was it, the forms, was it a symbolic implication of the forms? So I became really interested in this. At the same time, I became also interested in museum objects and displays, which kind of led to this. Actually, I'll just move on to this project, which is, so this is a part of the series which is the same as the one on display here, which is titled Heritage Studies. And really, this series was kind of guided by an attempt to try to understand, if you encounter these objects which seem to be really relevant, and they seem to be saying something which is very of the present. It's not about history, but it's really of what feels like now. How do you bring that about? How do you kind of, the sense that you feel, how do you communicate it to someone else? And to me, it became clear that what I would have to do that is to make them again. So this series is actually, that's what I did here, is I started to remake these objects that I thought were, saying something I believed was relevant to the present. And again, they didn't necessarily look like the objects on which they were based. So it wasn't just the idea that it's the same material, it's the same form, it's the same color, but I still think they are the same. One can say that. So these are other other ones from the series. And also, I think what was clear to me is that when you encounter objects in a museum, they don't just speak through their form, but they speak through everything around them. They speak through the room in which they are placed. They speak through the plinth on which they are placed. They speak through the light which lights them. They speak through the caption as well. So I decided to also incorporate the caption as a way to kind of bring out what I believe these elements were saying. So these are some examples.
As a young man.
Okay. Actually, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a specific question about the triptychs, the sort of middle part when you were creating scenes. Did you intentionally make those interiors? Because it seemed like a lot of the initial photographs were exteriors, then it was interiors, and then there was a third place, and I wondered if you would talk about that at all.
Yeah. It's like I said, of course, the idea was to use memory, but this could mean anything, right? Memory could be like a smell, like you see an image and it reminds you, and then you think of a taste, and I wanted to find a way to kind of bring it into a more rigorous process. So I decided to work only with settings and to use interior settings as a way to bring forth these memories. It's not the only way, but it's one way I decided to go with to kind of bring a certain form of consistency, but also to kind of a way to kind of limit myself when I was making these.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. We talked a little bit or touched on this today, but I wonder if you could talk about the issue of truth or like veracity in process. So if we took the triptychs, for example, how important is it in real life that those are original photos versus stock photos, or that you did that, or the piece like Lexicon, or even Common Elements, like that those are actual lines from those autobiographies?
I mean, I think it's interesting when you start to think of communication, because I think it kind of oversteps this idea of real or not real. Because if I'm trying to communicate something to you, I can make up a story or can tell you part of the news. But it's really because I'm trying to get something across. So I feel, in a way, it doesn't really matter. Probably when I work, it ends up being very rigorous and systematic. But it's a way for me to try to make sure that I'm not doing whatever. But I think I think the way I think of it is, it's not really about whether something is real or not real. If someone is telling you a story, then they're trying to tell you something. Then what are they trying to say? And that would be the question, as opposed to whether this story exists or doesn't exist.
I really enjoyed the exhibition, and I think it's very thoughtful. But I spent a lot of time reading the pieces on the wall and then looking at the pieces. And how long does it take you to make that image? I mean, they're really they certainly bring a lot more to the idea than just a reproduction.
Yeah. You mean the captions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Even the pieces, to understand the pieces. I mean, I looked at the pieces first, and then I realized, oh, no, I had to go to the wall to really understand the pieces. And, I mean, your thought process is obviously very complex and, as you say, very rigorous. What is that process?
Yeah. And so with the works and the captions, they became both a way to communicate what I believe the original object was saying. And the original object, I thought, was speaking not just by the object, but also by the text. So they both come together to do something. It's not necessarily that one follows the other, but it's like they're collaborating, or you can think of them.
Are you drawing then?
Yeah, so it's kind of, thank you for your question, actually. It's a good thing to say, because I think of all of these as studies. And I think even though I'm not going to alter them myself, it's really important to present them as studies, because I don't really feel like I would have the confidence to present them as a conclusive form. But rather, I'm more interested to present them and be like, this is my attempt. And maybe if you do something, then you would do it differently. Maybe you would change the object. Maybe the object would be smaller. Maybe you would make it out of, brass instead of wood. Or so I'm kind of interested in this conversation. Yeah.
More questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.